Hello, everyone. Welcome to Module 5's reading overview video. Here we're going to be talking about the details of some of the chapters you'll be reading this week. You're assigned 3 chapters to read this week, chapter 10, 11, and 12. Chapter 10 is titled Feeding Cities, Urbanism, and Agriculture. This is pages 220 to 243. The focus here is on cities and the support that is necessary for city life. We'll think about what makes a city, and in particular, the complex parts of cities, the economies and social dynamics that it has depended on. This isn't the first time that we've talked about cities in this course. Previously, we've looked at Mesoamerican examples of Teotihuacan and Tenochtitlan, as well as Çatalhöyük in modern-day Turkey, one of the first city examples to come into the archaeological record. However, this chapter is focused on what it takes to feed a city. Starting off, we're going to be looking at examples from the classic and ancient Mayan civilization, who were focused more so in Mesoamerican lowlands of the Yucatan and areas south of there in modern-day Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, El Salvador, and Honduras. Over nearly 2,000 years of time went into transforming multiple locations in this region, not only into agricultural production zones, but zones of surplus production and economies that could supply the process of urbanization. Not just in one location, but multiple locations that existed in a more or less connected cultural network across a wide geography. So we'll read about the Mirador Basin on the border of Mexico and Guatemala, where during the pre-classic period, we see this process emerge. Moving forward in time into the classic Mayan period, from around 250 AD to 900 AD, we will see an expanse of the ongoing monumental architecture and city building into the southern Patan region and emerge in the southern Mayan mountains of Belize. We will see how following this period into the post-classical Mayan period, cities still persisted. Even after some were abandoned, others popped up, but in different ways, taking on monumental architecture and city building a little bit differently in a drier and more northern location of southern Mexico and the Yucatan Peninsula. These cities, which existed for hundreds of years more than our modern American cities, were long-lived and scattered across a number of different environments. We'll be touching again on the Mayan culture in chapter 13, when we are going to read about the Mayan writing systems. Continuing on the topic of agriculture for city building, we will see examples from the Khmer Kingdom in Cambodia, which is the population responsible for a complex network of irrigation canals and the subsequent construction of the archaeological city of Angkor, where the astounding temple complex of Angkor Wat exists. Today, this is a renowned UNESCO World Heritage Site. We will see just how critical this system was for supporting the population, which existed in the 14th century AD, hundreds of years after the emergence of the classic Mayan culture. But this center of the Khmer Kingdom was much more extensive and supported populations that Mayan cities could come nowhere close to matching. We will read about why that is and how archaeologists know that this was the case even after the population there had abandoned the site due to pressure from warring populations from Thailand, and eventually moved closer to the Mekong River and away from that threat. But in the process, giving up the sort of urban construction that rulers of Angkor had previously demanded and able to keep the agricultural production to support their large populations. You will also read in comparison about the rise of urbanization in Egypt and consider what was different about those city settings, because we believe that oftentimes they did not have the same sort of lifespan or population support as the other city examples we will be viewing this week. So although complex, it appears that rural development was more expansive and extensive, and therefore wasn't hugely dependent on cities for its complexity. As you read, we want to think about the necessity of cities. This is all meant to prompt you on what a complex society actually is. So take into the account the variety from the Mayan, Khmer, Egyptian, and Sumerian examples we will read about this week, and think about their variety of complex arrangements that supported their populations. Complexity is a cornerstone feature in human behavior and cognition. But is it truly reliant on urbanization and city building more so than rural existence? If not, how might cities today change to better integrate rural life and balance the complexity of cities and the issues that they face today with the very essential qualities of agricultural production? Chapter 11 is the next chapter you'll be reading. This is titled Building Monuments, Building Society, Collective Labor as Social Identity. This is pages 245 to 274. And we'll be reading about not just cities this week, but also the monuments that are used to see how they were built and utilized by different groups of people who eventually would come together to follow or at least adhere to a similar understanding of their environment that was established and connected with monument use. We will focus on a couple of monuments that were constructed essentially around the same time, the Great Pyramids of Egypt and Stonehenge in England. And there will be comparisons with other monument examples along the way. As you read this chapter, be sure to focus on the process of building monuments, whereas some may emerge quickly, others may take longer. And over time, there may be numerous additions or expansions to the monument that have been previously constructed. So although Stonehenge may have begun construction much earlier than the pyramids, their construction phases eventually overlap with one another through the updates that were made to Stonehenge. Also, we want to think about how very different kinds of societies use monuments as a similar strategy to build their societies and create a group identity. This isn't so much about the logistics of what humans need biologically to survive. They aren't being used to create food storages. Rather, they are places of ritual and places where sacred communion is made possible for larger groups. And this is evident and consistent, this is evident in the consistent use of the many monuments in the ancient past as burial grounds. The final chapter we will read was added this week to our syllabus. This is chapter 12, Conspicuous Consumption, Feasts, Burials, and Sacrifice. This is pages 276 to 295. We'll be introducing you to the concept of conspicuous consumption and consumption practices of a variety of different archaeological societies that really helped tip them in the direction of higher levels of interaction. And we will see how archaeologists make those interpretations and what evidence they use, such as food residues, to make those interpretations. We will start by looking at metal materials, looking at the process of smelting and reusing metal materials to create and recreate metal tools and technologies that became useful in a number of areas of human behavior, even conspicuous consumption. Especially that of agricultural harvesting and cooking, we will look at the conspicuous consumption that's made possible. And even in mortuary and ritual practices where people are buried with metal objects or disposing of them in ceremony, showing us evidence of this consumption by making those metal objects out, basically taking them out of circulation of human use and reuse. When we look beyond the consumption of inorganic materials and read about surplus food production and consumption through the practice of feasting, certainly a practice of humans that continues today. We will see how this is a cornerstone of our complex interactions and how feasting has remained a cornerstone of sharing and creating reciprocity between different groups of people. One way we will learn about this sort of consumption is through a lot of American college students' favorite topic, beer. We will look at a couple of different beer making processes and the archaeological evidence that we use to understand those practices, which take grain, water, and yeast fermentation to create alcoholic beverages. In ancient times, prior to refrigeration, this is a great example of feasting and conspicuous behaviors because it takes a large surplus of grain and converts it into a product which has to be consumed quickly and in an equally large amount before it spoils and expires. But this was a highly valued product, not only because of the surplus production and labor it required, but also the large-scale cooperative effort that was necessitated for its consumption. We will end with a look at what is essentially the epitome of conspicuous consumption for humans, that of human sacrifice. Here we want to consider how this is the ultimate sacrifice, the ultimate form of conspicuous consumption. This is a practice, of course, many of us are knowledgeable about at this point because of our lessons previously on the Aztec tribute rituals of blood and sacrifice. But we will expand to understand how many other societies have engaged in this sort of practice. We'll look at Viking populations in Northern Europe during the Iron Age and the early medieval periods. We'll also look at Incan populations that practice a certain kind of sacrificial ritual with children at highly elevated locations in the Andean mountainous region. A famous case here being that of the Ice Maiden, famous due to the extremely well-preserved remains of that individual that persisted over 500 years of time. And we will see how other populations in Europe, like the Phoenicians and the Carthaginians, also partook in human sacrificial behaviors that also included child sacrifice. A good point to remember is that during this time and in this region, child sacrifice was a theme threaded along many Mediterranean and biblical populations. And this is evident even in biblical stories like that of Abraham and his first fruit sacrifices. One of the notions to keep in mind is that we can look at all of these similarities and differences among sacrificial practices or conspicuous consumption behaviors and make a comparative interpretation that humans have become fixated on what surplus production means for them and how to properly address and distribute that surplus production among their populations. We have ruled out some practices that have existed in the past today, but does that mean we have figured out the most efficient and sustainable way to administer our surplus production that now engulfs most of the globe? These are some food for thought moving forward into our assignments this week. I hope you enjoyed the readings, and if you have any questions, as always, feel free to reach out and ask. Thanks.